Welcome to Stamps Old World UK, the ultimate destination for stamp collectors, history lovers, and philately enthusiasts from around the world. Today, we are going to dive deep into a stamp that has become a cornerstone in both American postal history and international stamp collecting circles, the 5-cent blue George Washington stamp. This beautiful stamp, with its striking blue hue and iconic portrait of the first President of the United States, is more than just a postage stamp. It is a gateway into a bygone era, a reflection of early 20th century American identity, and in many cases, a hidden treasure worth far more than its original face value. But the big question remains, how much is this stamp actually worth in today's market? What determines its value, and what should you look for if you have one of these classic stamps sitting in a family album or inside a forgotten envelope? In this video, we will explore the full history of the 5-cent Washington stamp, break down the different printings and varieties, discuss how collectors grade stamps for market value, and finally reveal the real prices these stamps are fetching in 2025 in US dollars. Let's begin with the origin of the 5-cent George Washington stamp. The version most collectors are familiar with belongs to the Washington Franklin series issued by the United States Postal Service between 1908 and 1922. These stamps were printed during a period of experimentation and change in American philately, and the 5-cent blue Washington became one of the most widely used denominations for international mail. Unlike today's stamps that are often printed in mass uniform designs, these early stamps were produced using different printing methods, perforations, watermarks, and shades of color. This means that what looks like a simple 5-cent blue stamp could actually belong to a dozen different varieties, each with its own collector value. Some were printed with a double-line watermark, while others had no watermark at all. Some were printed on flat plate presses, others on rotary presses. And some versions were coil stamps, produced in rolls for vending machines, and are now considered extremely rare. That's why identifying the exact type of your 5-cent stamp is the first step in determining its true value. Now, let's talk about condition, which is one of the most crucial factors when it comes to pricing stamps. Collectors and dealers use several grading categories, ranging from poor and fair, all the way to very fine and gem. A perfectly centered, mint-condition stamp that has never been hinged and still has its full original gum can sell for many times more than the same stamp in used or damaged condition. Stamps with visible tears, fading, creases, or missing perforations lose significant value, even if they are rare varieties. On the other hand, if you happen to have a 5-cent blue Washington that is well-centered, has strong vibrant color, clean edges, and minimal cancellation marks, you could be looking at a valuable collectible. Experts often use a magnifying loupe and watermark detector to identify subtle features. The differences between a $5 stamp and a $500 stamp might not be obvious to the untrained eye, but to serious collectors, those small differences matter a great deal. So what is the 5-cent George Washington stamp worth in today's market, in July 2025? As of now, the average market price for a common, used 5-cent Washington stamp from the Washington Franklin series is about $3 to $10 US. This includes varieties with double-line watermarks and perforations of 12, which were more commonly printed. However, stamps in very fine mint condition, with strong centering and no faults, are currently selling for $40 to $120 US, depending on the exact variety and the demand at auction. Prices can soar even higher when a stamp is part of a rare subset. For example, a mint-condition 5-cent Washington coil stamp with perforation 10, unwatermarked, recently sold at a heritage auction for over $2,000 US. Another example includes a used stamp with a rare rotary press printing on a vertical coil. This fetched an impressive $3,750 US due to its scarcity and clean cancellation. So yes, while many stamps in this series are modestly priced, the right combination of rarity and condition can make certain examples extremely valuable. Beyond condition and type, another factor that affects value is the presence of printing errors. Collectors often pay premium prices for so-called freaks and oddities. For example, a stamp with an off-center image, a misprint of the perforation holes, or even a color variation can be highly desirable. The same applies to stamps with double transfers, where the engraved image appears twice due to a printing mishap. These rare flaws are not only fascinating but also increase a stamp's rarity, making it more attractive to seasoned collectors. One such error, an inverted color shift of the 5-cent blue stamp, was recently valued at over $4,000 US because only a handful are known to exist. So if you're sorting through a box of old stamps, keep your eyes open for anything that looks unusual. It might just be a jackpot. Let's also take a moment to talk about how and where to sell your stamps if you believe you have a valuable piece. There are several routes you can take. You can list your stamp on online marketplaces like eBay, Delcamp, or Hipstamp, where thousands of stamp collectors search daily for rare items. If you go this route, make sure to include high-resolution images, describe the condition accurately, and mention any catalog references such as Scott numbers. You could also consider selling through a stamp auction house or a philatelic dealer, especially if you believe your stamp is worth more than $100. Auction houses often attract high-end buyers who are looking for specific varieties in excellent condition. And lastly, joining a stamp collecting society, such as the American Philatelic Society, can offer additional support, resources, and potential buyers within a dedicated collector community. For collectors, investors, and history lovers, the 5-cent George Washington stamp remains a brilliant entry point into the wider world of philately. It teaches us about printing methods, American history, international postage rates, and the subtle art of design that went into early 20th century stamps. And even if the stamp you own isn't a rare or expensive variety, it still has cultural and educational value that makes it worth preserving. The joy of stamp collecting isn't just in the dollar value, it's in the discovery, the stories, the research, and the connections to history that each stamp offers. But when that historical value also brings with it high market prices, the reward becomes all the sweeter. As we bring this episode to a close, let's take a final look at what we've learned today. The value of a 5-cent blue George Washington U.S. postage stamp in 2025 can range anywhere from a few dollars to several thousand depending on a range of factors: print type, watermark, coil design, color shade, errors, and overall condition. Always inspect your stamps carefully, consult reliable catalogs like the Scott catalog, and don't be afraid to seek professional opinions. You never know, what seems like an ordinary stamp today could turn out to be a rare treasure tomorrow. Next up, the 5-cent blue Zachary Taylor stamp. This stamp is more than a portrait on paper, it represents an era in which the United States was rapidly expanding, recovering from war, and evolving politically. Featuring the face of the 12th President of the United States, Zachary Taylor, a celebrated general from the Mexican-American War, this stamp was part of the classic definitive series issued in the 1870s and 1880s. And while its original purpose was purely functional, used to mail letters across the country, today, this vintage stamp can be worth far more than its original 5-cent value. So how much is the 5-cent Zachary Taylor stamp actually worth today, in dollars? What makes one version of this stamp more valuable than another? And how do serious collectors determine if this blue gem is truly rare or relatively common? Stay with us as we unpack the history, design, varieties, and current market value of the Zachary Taylor 5-cent stamp. The 5-cent Zachary Taylor stamp was first issued in 1875 and reissued several times into the 1880s. It forms part of the Second Continental Bank Note Company series, later taken over by the American Bank Note Company. This era of U.S. stamps is referred to as the bank note issues, and it's known for its detailed line engraving, large portraits, and classic serif lettering. The portrait of Zachary Taylor is based on a painting and shows the president in military uniform, staring forward with a stern, commanding expression, a tribute to his military background and brief presidency. The stamp is engraved in a rich blue shade, with the words, U.S. Postage, prominently placed above and 5 cents below. But collectors should be aware that there were multiple printings and perforation types, which means not all 5-cent Taylor stamps are valued equally. To determine the stamp's true value, you must first identify which version you have. Some were printed with a grill, a waffle-like embossing used briefly in the 1870s to prevent reuse of stamps. These are very rare today. The 1875 reissue version of the 5-cent Zachary Taylor, for example, has no grill and is considered a special print with limited circulation. Only 10,000 of them were printed, and many were never used. On the other hand, the 1880 to 1888 American bank note printings are more common but still desirable to collectors. Perforation differences, such as 12, 11, or 11 by 10.5, also help narrow down the issue date and printing company. Even the shade of blue ink used can be a clue. A deeper or more vibrant blue might indicate an early printing, while a duller blue could point to a later issue. Identifying these fine differences is essential, and it's the first step in assessing market value. Now let's move to the topic of condition, which plays a huge role in the price of any collectible stamp. As with coins and banknotes, the grading of stamps includes several factors: centering, cancellation marks, gum condition, and overall preservation. A well-centered stamp with full perforations and no visible damage is significantly more valuable than one that is off-center, creased, or torn. For in used examples, mint condition with original gum is ideal. In 2025, a fine to very fine used 5-cent Zachary Taylor stamp is typically valued between $10 to $40. However, stamps in very fine or extra fine condition, especially with clear cancellation marks or vibrant ink, can fetch $100 to $200 at auction. Mint condition examples, particularly those from the 1875 reissue, are much rarer and can range from $300 to over $1,500, depending on centering and gum quality. There are even rarer varieties and printing errors that can push the value even higher. Some Zachary Taylor stamps have been found with double transfers, where parts of the engraved image were mistakenly duplicated during the printing process. Others show partial grill impressions or ink smudges that make them one-of-a-kind items. These kinds of errors, although not common, are highly prized by collectors and can command prices over $2,000. Provenance and certification also add value. Stamps that have been authenticated and graded by professional services like the Philately Foundation or the American Philatelic Society are considered more trustworthy and desirable. Now let's talk about the modern market in 2025. Online platforms such as eBay, Hipstamp, and Delcamp remain the most accessible places for buyers and sellers of classic U.S. stamps. A search for 5-cent Zachary Taylor stamp brings up dozens of listings, ranging from heavily used examples priced around $5 to certified, and used stamps asking $1,000 or more. Auction houses specializing in philately, like Siegel Auctions or Cherrystone, have also sold rare examples of this stamp in recent months, some for well over $3,000 due to rare variations, provenance, or pristine condition. But not every stamp will hit those high numbers. Most fall into the $20 to $100 range unless they carry special features. So if you own one of these stamps and want to sell, it's essential to do your research, compare listings, and if necessary, consult a trusted dealer or submit it for expert evaluation. But beyond the dollar value, what makes the 5-cent Zachary Taylor stamp truly special is its place in history. Issued in a time when America was still defining itself after the Civil War and moving into the Industrial Age, this stamp not only carried letters but also carried forward the memory of a man who led soldiers in war and briefly led a nation. Zachary Taylor served only 16 months as president before his sudden death, but his legacy was preserved in stamps like these, making him one of the early American leaders to be immortalized in philatelic form. For collectors, the opportunity to own such a piece of history is priceless. As we close today's episode, I encourage you to revisit your stamp collection with fresh eyes. If you have a 5-cent blue Zachary Taylor stamp, take a closer look. Use a magnifier, check the perforations, and examine the color. Try to identify whether it belongs to the 1875 special reissue or one of the more common later printings. Even if it's not worth thousands, it's still a valuable piece of history, and one that deserves to be protected. If you're unsure, don't hesitate to reach out to stamp forums, Facebook groups, or experienced dealers. The world of philately is filled with helpful communities eager to support fellow collectors. Next up, the 5-cent George Washington stamp from the 1960s. While many collectors are drawn to 19th-century classics with ornate engravings and rare perforations, there's a quiet elegance and strong historical importance in the more modern issues. This particular 5-cent stamp, featuring the sculpted bust of George Washington, was issued as part of the Prominent Americans series, a set that aimed to honor the nation's leaders and thinkers with simple, refined designs that echoed the strength of modern America. Though this stamp might not seem rare at first glance, many collectors today are discovering that with the right condition, printing variation, or usage, these stamps can carry both monetary and historical value in 2025. So let's take a journey through the story of this stamp, how it was used, what varieties exist, and most importantly, how much it's worth today in the collector's market. The 5-cent George Washington stamp was first issued in 1962, during a time of major change and innovation in the American postal system. As the United States moved into the space race era, its postal designs began to shift from the elaborate engraved style of earlier decades to simpler, more modern line art and minimalist compositions. This stamp is a perfect example of that evolution. Instead of the finely detailed engraved portraits used in previous issues, this design features a sculpted bust of George Washington, based on a famous statue by the neoclassical sculptor Jean-Antoine Houdon. The image shows Washington looking upward with a stoic, thoughtful expression. The background is lightly shaded, and in the lower left corner is a clean, sans serif inscription, 5 cents US postage. It was printed in a steely gray violet tone, and while it may look modest, this stamp had a wide circulation across the country and was used on millions of letters during the 1960s. This 5-cent issue was part of the broader Prominent Americans series, which replaced the earlier Liberty series and featured not only presidents but also authors, scientists, and inventors. As the standard first-class postage rate was 5 cents in 1962, this stamp was heavily used in everyday correspondence. And that's where the story gets interesting for collectors. Because it was so widely used, most examples that survive today are in used condition, often torn, postmarked, or faded. However, mint-condition stamps, those that have never been used and still retain their original gum, are less common, especially in well-centered condition. That's where the value begins to build. So how much is this stamp worth today, in 2025? On the lower end, used copies of the 5-cent George Washington from the 1960s typically sell for around 10 cents to $1, depending on the clarity of the cancellation and the condition of the stamp. However, a mint never hinged stamp in very fine or better condition can sell for $3 to $10, especially if it has exceptional centering. But what really sets certain examples apart are the varieties and printing errors. Some collectors have identified examples with color shifts, misperforations, or ink smudges, small mistakes that occurred during the printing process at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. These flawed stamps, especially if they are dramatic and well-preserved, can fetch $20 to $100, or even more if certified by a philatelic expert. A few rare plate number coil versions and imperfect edge finds from misprints have even sold at auction for over $250, especially when combined with original post office documentation or first-day cover status. Speaking of first-day covers, the first day of issue for this stamp was January 20, 1962, and collectors often seek out these covers with the special postmark indicating the exact release date. A clean, unaddressed first-day cover with a crisp cancellation and a decorative cachet featuring George Washington can add another layer of value. These covers currently sell for $5 to $20, with some elaborate hand-painted cachets reaching as high as $50. So if you happen to find this stamp on an old envelope with a January 1962 postmark, don't throw it away. It could be a piece of postal history with much more value than you'd expect. But value isn't just about the dollar figure. What makes this 5-cent Washington stamp truly meaningful is its historical context. Issued during the height of the Cold War, this stamp was mailed during an era when the U.S. was undergoing immense social and technological change. Letters bearing this stamp may have carried news between soldiers and their families, love letters, political speeches, or even government documents. Each stamp tells a story, not only of the men it portrays, but of the millions of lives it quietly touched. And in that sense, every surviving copy is a little time capsule, a reminder of the era when sending a letter cost only 5 cents and communication traveled by ink and envelope. If you are a collector, or just starting your philatelic journey, the 5-cent George Washington stamp from 1962 is an excellent example of how even modern stamps can be both meaningful and valuable. Its affordability makes it accessible, and its variations, such as printing shifts, plate blocks, and first-day covers, offer opportunities for deeper research and collecting. If you have one of these stamps, I recommend storing it properly in an acid-free stamp album, away from moisture and direct sunlight. If you suspect you have a rare variety, it may be worth submitting it to a grading service for certification. A stamp that seems ordinary at first glance could turn out to be a collector's gem. As we wrap up today's deep dive, we hope you've gained a clearer understanding of the 1962 5-cent George Washington stamp, both in terms of its historical role and its current market value in 2025. From everyday mail to high-end stamp shows, this modest stamp has traveled through time, and it continues to be a favorite among collectors for its quiet dignity and classic design. It reminds us that not every valuable stamp needs to be a century old or worth thousands. Sometimes the true value lies in its story and the connections it created. Thank you for watching Stamps Old World UK. If you found this video informative, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into the world of rare and vintage stamps, and ring the bell so you never miss a new upload. We publish videos every week about stamp values, postal history, and collector insights from the UK, the USA, and around the world. If you own this stamp or any related to the Prominent Americans series, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. Until next time, keep collecting, keep learning, and remember, every stamp has a journey, and it's our job to discover where it leads.